All right, this is William Tincup, and I am on today with Dr. Tom Janz. Again, this is our second interview. Of course, the first interview you probably already listened to. I hope you have. And if you haven't, you should, because it was awesome. The first interview, we got to know Dr. Tom in a way of just kind of his background, where he came from, what he likes, what he's interested in, what he's smart about, all that type of stuff. So the conversation kind of went all over the place, but really it was more about just kind of his background in general. And today we want to get into the relationship with the wonderful company eTechie. We want to get into kind of, how he got to know eTechie, and how he's helped them and coached them and mentored and advised them. And then also some of the things that he sees in the future from working with eTechie. So, Dr. Tom, why don't we start with let's start with the beginning. How did you get to know the good folks at eTechie?
Well, good to speak with you again, William. I think, well, it started when Amanda sent me an email asking me to join the advisory board, the research advisory board of eTechie. But I knew eTechie, or at least I knew Amanda from some of the HR Tech and TA Tech shows that I've attended, and we had some conversations before then. So I think that kind of started with an informal connection and then led to that. And then the other thing about my background that really relates to eTechie is that I wrote the book on behavioral interviewing many years ago with Lowell Hellervik and David Gilmore. And that behavioral interviewing can be the underlying basis of both technical and performance-related interviewing questions that eTechie performs for their clients, so that clients can focus on their business, and eTechie can provide both the technical expertise. The people that conduct the interviews are highly trained and certified in their technical areas, but then they are also provided with a structure of behavioral questions for the non-technical areas, so that they can assess both can this person do it and will they do it on the job in a way that will allow them to get along with others.
And just real quick for the novice out there, an example of a behavioral question that you're talking about. Could you spit one out real quick?
Sure. I mean, behavioral question always focuses on a specific incident of past performance. And so it'll be a question like, tell me about the most challenging project that you did, that you engaged in putting up an Oracle database, or, tell me about your most difficult systems design with, at least 100 nodes. And so it will get into a specific achievement or accomplishment. The person will then describe what they did, how they did it, and then the interviewer should be seamlessly interacting with them to get at how they overcame the problems and obstacles that occurred on every challenging or difficult project. So it's always about, tell me about your most challenging project or your largest installation. And you can be in any area, whether it's a technical area or just difficulty in dealing with the most difficult supervisor that you've had to overcome objections.
You've phrased it as a challenge. Do you find any usefulness as phrasing that as your success?
Well, you want to ask for both about successes, because in any success you overcome an obstacle, right? I mean, that's how it becomes a success. But you also want to talk sometimes about disappointments. Tell me about and tell me about the time you, instead of saying tell me about the time you screwed up the most, which is a hard question to get people to answer, you can say tell me about the time you learned the most from a specific challenge that you faced. And who was involved with that, and how did you first know that this was going to be a challenge, and then what did you do?
And so these types of behavioral questions can go across. They could be for executives. They could be operations manager, technical talent. Is it an area where behavioral questions don't work or don't work as well?
Well, they don't work as well if the person's never had any experience with that
Ah,
behavior at all,
right.
right? So some kind of low base rate types of behaviors around, violence or major theft. I mean, not many people have had those experiences, so it's hard to get at those.
Right.
Um, Behavioral, it works less well on highly routine jobs. A greeter at Walmart, for example. I mean, you could say, tell me about the most angry and
Mhm.
difficult person that ever came into the store, and how did you handle that? But it's such a highly recurring situation that those, the actual success stories are going to sound very similar from lots of different people. So
Right.
it's a successful approach for mid-level, professional, technical, managerial. In fact, some of the largest executive search firms will spend 4 or 5 hours doing going through with executive candidates a debrief of all the major hurdles they've overcome.
Right. Right. In your mind, what's the relationship between behavioral and personality?
Well, personality is really, I mean, it's measured most times in a self-report
Mhm.
methodology. So people are answering questions about, how often have they done this or that, or how much do they agree with this or that kind of statement.
Mhm.
And dimensions of personality get a preference, but not necessarily how people have dealt with those preferences in situations that are either supportive of that preference or that where that preference is the wrong kind of behavior to engage in.
Right.
So personality, I mean, the other thing we know from some of the recent large studies is that the fundamental dimensions of personality are pretty weak predictors of
Right.
job performance.
Right.
Uh, whereas behavioral interviews have been much better at predicting performance.
Right. And potentially combining those might, you just depending on the job might be something for people to look at or not.
Yeah.
Okay. So the past and how you got to know eTechie, I think that's fairly clear. How are you working with them now, more to the point of, and also, what do you see in how they assess and use assessments on behalf of their clients?
Well, I've reviewed some of the behavioral question stems that they use currently. Certainly in the technical area, they have, they have people describe specific examples of their technical skills, not just have you worked with,
Right.
a particular technology. Say that it was it could be a database or it could be a language. How familiar are you with Ruby on Rails, and people can answer a question like that, but then they turn it into, well, tell me about the most challenging Ruby on Rails project that you've done in the last year, and and once you hear that story, if the answer to that story is is well phrased and specific and detailed, that's great. But if you're kind of wondering if they're telling somebody else's story, you can always then flip it over to, well, that was a really great example of, how you use that in a gaming situation. Do you have an example of how you used that language in a different kind of application?
Right.
And so that they are less likely to have a prepared answer for something that they're sort of asked at the last minute. But it's
Right.
still a behavioral question.
That's right.
Oh,
And to get to the breadth and depth of experience. So behavioral questions in the way that we've already talked to them up till now. How do we? Because I used to struggle with this when I would hire technical talent and I'd see an acronym like Java.
mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, was that one project for 15 years, or did you work on 1,000 projects, day by day? Like, what? How do I know the breadth and depth of your experience? So what? How how do how do how do they get to that from an
Well,
assessment
to
perspective?
get at the depth part, you sort of say, tell me about your top three, hits in the use of Java. in the industry that you're currently focused on. And then for the depth part, then you can say, now tell me about additional opportunities where you've used Java in areas that are not in that core focus, to get an idea of how have you applied your knowledge in Java in other ways. And there you look for more different examples. Again, it's a matter, though, of focusing in on specific uses and applications. They can start with a general description of a project area, like creating chatbots or other kinds of applications. But the idea is that you have them focus first on the things that are their examples of deepest performance, right, and then have them hit some highlights of areas where they've used that technology in a wide range of settings.
Right, right. So for technical talent, we ask behavioral questions, we ask some experiential questions. What else should we ask in your mind? What else should we ask technical talent?
Well, technical talent, doesn't work in a vacuum unless, it's an area where they really are just developing code very independently, where the specs are kind of thrown over the wall and then they just throw the code back over the wall. But that, my understanding of what's happening in the tech world these days is that happens less and less. And now there's more an expectation that people collaborate on teams to try to build an experience and not just a piece of code. And then that requires that you actually work with others, that you're able to listen to others, that you do a lot of listening up front before you start coding, and that you maintain that communication as you begin with the initial story, sort of like storyboards, or how you see the actual experience unfolding. You get feedback from your manager, from other members of the team, from some of the customers either within your organization or outside the organization as you progress along. And it's the people that try to build the whole thing in a vacuum are the ones that don't perform as well. The people that are the top performers are people who keep tabs and touch with lots of different touch points that are going to impact that experience over time, and how well that experience plays out, how well it's used by others. So you can ask in your questions, tell me about them. Tell me about the time when you learned the most. As you started with a project, you had an initial concept of how it was going to go, what you were going to do in it. And then you encountered feedback from others and made the biggest changes, and it worked out in the long run.
Right. I got a question now about like the difference between the architect of technical architect versus the people that do the work. At least as I understand it, management, technical managers versus technical doers, if you will. Is there a different line of questioning that you would take with someone that's more of the manager or more of an architect than someone that's not?
Well, the manager has to maintain, the difference really is scope of focus. Okay, so people that are performing at more of the doer level have a smaller scope of focus. They may have 4 or 5 projects, that they have to multitask on at a time, whereas the manager may have 20 or 30. And, several different doers are being guided by and interacted with and touched on by the manager. So the manager has to keep, sort of frame of mind on multiple different projects, some of them proceeding faster than others, some of them that may require more coaching and support than others. So I think the focus at the managerial level is how do people orchestrate and manage this flow of work towards the overall project objective that may require input from several different kinds of specialties.
Right. So let me ask you a different question about when we talked to Amanda at eTechie, and she was
Hmm.
talking about the 5-point scale that they're working on, and she said it at 3.8, there's interest, and at 4.0 there's offer, which I find
Right.
fascinating. I know you haven't dug into the data yet. I know that that's going to be one of the things that you're probably going to dig into, but I find that fascinating from a recruiting perspective to know the inflection points. Like
Right.
on
Right.
that scale, like with technology, I could see this actually being something that it informs the recruiter on where they are based on, based on where they are on the scale.
Yeah, yeah. I
You
mean, and of course, those kinds of things reflect means, but not
mm,
absolutes,
right,
right? So some people who actually scored a 3 got progressed on to the final interview, and some people who scored less than a 4 were actually given an offer. But the preponderance of people met those scale points. So if you've got some candidates in your queue, and they're down below the 3.5, then you're going to look to get some more candidates in so that you'll be able to make offers to the number of people that you have in your sourcing target plan. So I think having those numbers is helpful, sort of from a activity planning and
mm-hmm,
energy level kind of planning. But to completely rule somebody out just because they have less than 3.8, I don't think that's
that's
uh,
right.
that wouldn't be the message to take from that.
Do you see, or have you studied already, kind of how machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be interacting with your world in general? But just do you already kind of see how that's going to play out? Or are you already kind of seeing some people using machine learning or AI in this way?
The biggest use of AI at this point is really interacting with candidates, getting back to all the candidates with
Hmm.
chatbots and
Hmm.
sometimes I guess they're moving from simply text chats to voice chats with a simulated voice. So machine learning artificial intelligence is all about having machines do things that people do, right? I mean, that's really
Right.
what it is, and doing it intelligently and repeatedly with high reliability. Um, Machine learning requires that you have good, strong data. In other words, that the measures of the outcomes. Did this Is this candidate one that should have received an offer, and is the candidate somebody who actually performed well on the job? So that requires a lot of increased quality data, and some of that's coming from measures, performance measures, certainly in the high tech world, where you have now highly reliable measures of code, numbers of code lines developed, number of coding errors, redos necessary, hours of this and that. So that instead of having just supervisory ratings, which themselves are still useful information, but sometimes very hard to get, you can get this automated real-time information that will lead to more of the machine learning in the future. Because machine learning means the machine has to go through a trial, observe what happens, use the knowledge of what happens to sharpen the predictive process in the trial. That then requires, good knowledge of what happens. So you don't want just big opinion, you want big data. And you want the big data to be reflective of highly reliable outcomes, as opposed to subjective judgments. And so I think over time, we're going to see what in the past has been a lot of data used in the outcome side will transition to harder, more reliable measures that then can contribute to greater application of machine learning.
Right. So, because you've studied this for a long time, and I won't say how long, but for a long
Good.
time, you're an expert at it. What should people know about what best what best predicts success or performance? So, what are the things when they're thinking about this? What are some of the best indicators of predicting success or predicting value or performance?
Well, over the last 100 years, there's been research on this that has been analyzed and studied. Um, the best single predictor of performance is general mental ability. Ability of people to solve problems, see patterns emerging in subtle patterns emerging as the replications come in, as you start to see what happens when I try this, mastery of knowledge in certain areas. It's not just acquiring a large collection of knowledge, it's being able to see the relationships among things as they go. So general mental ability is quite important. Another important factor, the second most important one, is just measures of integrity, the extent to which people do what they say they're going to do, and it's not just rule compliance, which is a component of it, but it's a sort of work hard to deliver real value and to deliver on undertakings and to communicate when things aren't going to happen the way they initially thought, to get in there early and communicate and openly and transparently rework the deal so that it's a good deal for all sides.
And it's hard because there's conflict there. I noticed that you I think you did this strategically, but you used the word mental ability, and normal people would say intelligence. And I was wondering if you were avoiding IQ or EQ, or if you're just prone to saying mental ability as a kind of a synonym of those things.
Yeah, well, mental abilities, general mental ability or cognitive ability is broader than simply being able to answer math questions or algebra. So, IQ was a measure of practical intelligence, but it became identified with a lot of verbally loaded measures. Measures of cognitive ability are sometimes, can be measured with nonverbal spatial measures and other, so there's spatial ability, there's numerical ability, there's verbal ability. Verbal ability doesn't turn out to predict as much in a smooth, continuous way as just this ability to see these emerging subtle patterns, which can be measured with spatial and
pattern recognition.
Yeah. So so I did avoid the word intelligence because I think it gets associated with the old style IQ test.
That's right. That's right. Mental ability is much bigger. It gives you a much bigger framework to play with.
Right, and it can often these days it's measured more in gamified environments. So that the ability to see these patterns emerging is not so much a series of tricky little quizzes where people, I think, can feel like they understood it, but they didn't quite make it through the puzzle. Whereas, with the gamified and spatial kinds of assessments, it's more obvious. It's just clearer that, raw mental horsepower is important. Now, it's not the only thing that's important, but it is. It's the largest single predictor.
My brother is a golf coach, and one of his favorite phrases, which is not a great phrase, is "you can't coach stupid." So there's that.
Well, but there's jobs that don't require a lot of that.
That's right. That's right.
Particularly in customer service and others. Although, you can be friendly, you can be positive, you can be respectful.
That's right.
You don't necessarily have to solve a Rubik's Cube while you're doing all that.
I got an off the charts question for you before we get to the future of eTechie. Can a team be, if we were putting a team together, let's say there were A talent, B talent, C talent, D talent. Okay, let's just say there was a strata of these talent. Can a team exist and have all A talent?
Well, there's companies like Apple that tell you that's what they try to do. And
I know some people that work at Apple, so I automatically laugh at that.
Yeah. But I've also heard the other side of the argument, which is that if you define A talent as merely being highly technical competent, then I think you'd have a problem with an A team that was all highly technically, particularly all highly technical people who thought they were the best
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
area, so that
Yeah.
each one of them is looking at each other, and then it becomes very competitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
No one's listening.
right. Now, if you define a talent, those people that have that confluence of, high mental ability, high
Integrity.
experience, high integrity, high depth of experience in the specific field that they need to develop
Right.
value in, and high respect for others,
That's
and
right. You get into
inclusion.
some of the tenets of EQ at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
If
That's right.
okay, so you could, if you have a team of 10 of those people, potentially you could have a team of a talent. But if they're all kind of one bullet Barneys, so to speak, then no. I'm fascinated by this question because I wonder when people recruit, what's the balance of the types of talent that they need, not just the competency mix, but just that mix of what is the ratio of A to B to C to D
Hmm.
in a given team, and what makes that right.
Well, there was some research that was done in Israel by Miriam Erez that said that you need a balance of people that are highly innovative, but you also need people who have some of the compliance and
Mm,
orderliness functions. And the I think the ratio was like 70-30.
yeah, yeah,
You need to have innovative people to come up with the ideas, but then you have to have people that sort of rein it in,
that's right.
make it orderly and organized so that it can be communicated,
I,
and otherwise it won't scale.
Well, see, I think that's absolutely true. I would love that research because the innovator is also the maverick, the renegade, the person challenging the status quo, the kind of the person
Mhm.
that keeps poking the stick at how we're doing things.
Mm.
Now, if you have all of those gals and guys doing that, no work gets done.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
have none of those people, there's no innovation.
Well,
So,
lots of work gets started, and
yeah.
then very little gets completed. That's
Good point. All right, I got to ask you
okay.
your next phase with eTechie. Where do you see kind of where you want to, as an advisor to them? What do you think they need to do next, and what do you want to do with them next?
Well, they're collecting a lot of data, and they have the transcripts of these technical interviews that include both technical content and non-technical or behavioral content, and then the experience questions. And that data would be interesting to analyze. In the past, we would have analyzed it by having subject matter experts quantify the data, categorize it into certain categories, look at the categories, relate those to successful versus non-successful candidates, and then successful versus non-successful performers. Because to be a successful candidate, you get an offer, but to be a successful performer, then you actually deliver value on the job.
Hmm.
Um, so in the future, though, there are latent semantic indexing technologies that essentially analyze qualitative content, the verbal content, which is once it's transcribed into text, we can do textual analysis. And that textual analysis can include
Oh
sentiment
wow!
analysis, which
Yeah,
is available today. I mean,
yeah.
IBM wants and offers it, many of them do. Uh,
Textium. Yeah.
but there may be other ways to do textual analysis that would allow you to score text answers on characteristics important to performance. And so then that would open the door, because the main problem with big data text analysis is it takes a lot of time. I
Right.
mean, if it's an hour interview, then it takes an hour for somebody to listen to that, code it, and then turn the codes into and do analysis on the code. So it'd be quite a bit of time. Whereas if you can machine code it, then that allows you to look at much larger collections of data, and you may find relationships that you would have previously missed.
Right. Right. All right. So let's wrap this up with, what question should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Well, what about what would be the application of eTechie that's currently being underserved? That
Okay. What is that? That's a great question.
Well, I would think, in my view, I mean, I think e-techie should be used not only just for mid-level technical professionals, but for people who are technical managers and executives, so that they can take it a little higher up the chain. And when we can move into that future world where we can score the textual content machine-wise, then we could take it down a level, probably by being able to manage costs a little bit better.
Right, right. Fascinating. Dr. Tom Janz, this is our second interview, and each one of these I've learned something. So I appreciate your time. I know you got a lot of stuff going on, but I appreciate it. And I hope everyone that listens to this one has also listened to the previous one where we talk a little bit more about his background. This was a little bit more about his interaction with e-techie. Dr. Tom, I appreciate your time. Thank you for today. And thank the audience for listening.
Thank you very much, William.